Well, hello, everybody. I am not Tammy Cass, who is in your program. She had COVID come through the household, and out of an abundance of precaution, she decided to stay home. And so I get to share the stage and have a conversation with you all this afternoon. So thank you very much for taking some time out as you work through your food coma from that rich lunch and the dark lights upstairs. I hope you enjoyed that. What my goal and what Tammy's goal for this presentation and for all of you is any of you who own land, who invest in land, who manage land on behalf of others, or who actually farm some or all of your own land, or all of the land that you farm is rented, we want you to enroll for free in the Sibo Carbon Bridge program. And I'm going to explain the whole concept kind of behind these programs, but I want to be upfront with you at the very beginning and say that's what our goal is. Our goal is to get growers and landowners and land managers enrolled in the program that is designed to scale regenerative agriculture in a risk-mitigated, dare I say it, risk-free way. That is the ultimate goal. So with that being said, our presentation is Crossing the Carbon Chasm, how we can scale regenerative agriculture in a de-risked way with technology. All right. Now that you all know why I'm here, if you want to leave, you can go and go do that. Come up to our booth. You can see demonstrations and actually sign up right there. We've got a cool Yeti giveaway, and we've got some 5-hour energy shots. We're the booth with the 5-hour energy shots. If you've seen those walking around, get you going. Maybe get you home tonight if you're going tonight. Take a couple for the road if you need those for tomorrow. Yeah. And I am Billy Kripe. I'm one of the leaders at Sibo Technologies, based up in Minneapolis. And so I am here having the opportunity to chat with you all. The whole idea of regenerative agriculture and carbon and climate commitments is not new. You've heard about that all throughout. Today, there was a great talk this morning by Chris from Indigo talking about the whole world of carbon farming and what kind of goes into that. That should not be new to any of you. And if it is new to you, there are plenty of resources online, including at cibotechnologies.com, where you can go to learn about that. The business environment, though, is something that is growing and changing very rapidly. Organizations, businesses are making their big carbon and climate commitments at a pace that is increasing. If the business is big enough, this falls into the realm of ESG, environment, sustainability, and governance rules and regulations. If it's smaller organizations, they just want to do the right thing for the planet, do the right thing to set their organization apart, and to say, yep, we care about environment, we care about climate, we're going to do something. The things that they are doing are really signing up to make carbon neutrality, carbon negative, carbon mitigation commitments for the climate, and they're making these proclamations really from the boardrooms without giving a whole lot of forethought about how they're going to come to life. And they say, look, we've got a lot of intention going on, we've got a lot of goodwill, our heart is in the right place, we want to make these changes. And so as of this morning, we have about over 800 companies with sustainability project disclosures. These run the gamut from regenerative ag projects to water quality projects to farming projects, et cetera, but all around the idea of reducing our CO2 footprint and helping to mitigate and ideally reverse climate change. There's over 200 companies who have made the climate pledge. This was really pioneered and evangelized by Amazon.com and some of the other big household tech company names. And then there's over 200 SBTI signatory companies. SBTI is the Science-Based Targets Initiative. This is a protocol or a process for reporting on what are we doing and saying here's the sorts of stuff that we're doing. So these are some of the largest organizations in the world. It's the Unilevers and the Pepsis and the Amazons and the Microsoft.coms and the Cargills and the General Millses and the Conagras of the world. So they're all making these large commitments to be carbon negative, carbon neutral, to mitigate their carbon footprint. And then they hand it off to somebody on an ESG team, somebody on a carbon project team to say, okay, let's go figure out how we're going to make this happen. And there's a whole range of activities that they engage in, and there's some emerging governance and some emerging regulations or regulatory suggestions that are being published around how to track and quantify and monitor Scope 1 and Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. These are all very technical types of emissions that fall into play here. But it's left to other people to figure out how they're going to make good on these commitments. And when it comes down to it, bringing programs to life from the boardroom at the farm gate is really where the rubber meets the road for those of you in this room and for what we do at Sibo Technologies. The idea around regeneration, right? Regenerative, regenerative, curious, sustainable, curious growers they're out there. Everybody's talking about this notion of carbon farming. There's an idea that it is a new cash commodity, that it could be worth a whole lot, but we don't really know kind of what to do or how to do it. And then that is combined with growers and with growing operations that have been implementing these practices, maybe under different names, for generations. So everything old is new again, and the idea of being able to get paid for it is something now that is starting to take hold. Some quick data, probably you know some of this, but when you put it together, it paints a really interesting picture. Cost of cover crops, you heard this morning, can run the gamut depending on what you're planting and where you're planting it. Cost of cover crops can run anywhere from 15 to 30 to $50 per acre. No-till conversions to a no-till tillage process may require either access to or investments in capital equipment to get new sorts of planters or attachments. And when you start adopting, for those who are doing conventional farming and start adopting these new practices, there's the reality is that there's limited positive results in the first 1 to 3 years. It's risky. You heard some of the folks earlier today talking about, hey, if somebody said, you've never farmed before, would you like to start farming, corn and soy this year, or corn this year and soy next year? Would you do everything perfect? Probably not. There's probably a learning curve there. The same is true when it comes to adopting and then scaling out the regenerative agriculture practices, specifically implementing crop rotations, no-till or conservation tillage, and implementing cover cropping. What's interesting is that while individual experiences vary, there was and there is now emerging evidence-based consensus around what is the net profit to individual growers and growing operations on an individual farm, individual parcel or field of land. Middle of last year, late last year, around August of last year, there was a report that came out called Conservation's Impact on the Farm's Bottom Line. Straight up ROI analysis. CIBO, who I think is, I know they're here. Yeah, CIBO is one of the hospitality sponsors here. They were a co-author on the report for what it's worth. So a shout out to them. And they studied a number of growers who are implementing this, and they did it over a series of seasons to say, hey, what's the actual ROI of implementing conservation tillage, cover crops, and reduced chemical applications, reduced input applications, et cetera. The study itself is really interesting, and it goes to talk about why there's some emerging interest, why some of you are in this room, and why hopefully by the end of this, you and all the folks who you represent or whose land that you manage will be going up to our booth or signing up for cibotechnologies.com/farmer to start enrolling in our programs. The three things that this study found was that conservation tillage and no-till reduces operating costs in year one and creates a higher net return and a lower per acre cost. So that's just straight up conservation tillage. And that is a catch-all for no-till, strip-till, and some other conservation tillage mechanisms. That was the scientific consensus of the study, right? The financial analysis of the study. Second major finding is that cover cropping is profitable, especially in the later years. Again, lower operating costs, primarily in the form of reduced nitrogen application, reduced input application necessity, and higher net returns on the actual yield. They go into detail on what those higher net returns really mean. Is it that you get a premium at the elevator for having something that's sustainably or regeneratively farmed? Sometimes. Is it that there's actually increased yield? Sometimes. The higher net cost, though, it all comes out to what at the end of the day is there's a higher net return rather. There's more money in the grower's pocket. And then the third is that success with regenerative agriculture happens when it is implemented in a stepwise fashion. It's not eating the whole hamburger all in one bite. It's taking some time to implement, to start on a parcel or a field, and then to scale it out across the operation. And these three findings, right, that conservation tillage has higher net returns, lower net operating cost per acre, that cover cropping yields higher net returns and lower operating cost per acre, and that a stepwise approach to doing this makes sense, that was really, really encouraging. And so what it means is that, hey, the science and the experience on the ground, the financial analysis says it probably makes sense. What do we need to do to get the curious, the interested, yeah, I might give this a try on some of my acres, not necessarily all of them. What is it going to take to get them over the hump? And this is where we hit pause for a moment and we say, okay, what do these programs require in order to be successful? Right? It requires really these core three elements. This is kind of the blinding flash of the obvious. It's, yes, you have to participate. You need some continuity. I think some of the earlier presenters talked about continuity, especially when it comes to things like cover cropping. You want to make sure that you're getting those crops in the ground season after season because the benefits accumulate over time. That's really what continuity means. Does that provide tension in the world of 1 to 3 year leases for tenant farmers? Absolutely it does. Is that a problem that has been solved? No, it has not been solved. And that is an area that the leaders on the financial and the management side of this industry are really starting to experiment with, like our hosts from People's Company, like some of those of you who are in this room. And we don't have the answers. Sibo Technologies is a technology company. That is something that we are very interested in. But there is a tension there, and we would be remiss to not acknowledge that. The idea, though, that the grower practices, the grower values are aligned is true, because the necessity for having climate resilient crops, land that can withstand periods of hotter and wetter weather or cooler and drier weather is very important, and the ability that nature-based solutions or regenerative ag-based solutions have to provide that resiliency, especially over time, is now proven in general, in specific on each individual piece of land, because each individual piece of land is different. It still has to be tweaked and tuned with the expertise of the folks who are intimately familiar with the land. Those are the people with the boots in the dirt, with the butts in the tractors, who know exactly what's going on those pieces and parcels of land, whether they are in Iowa or whether they're spread across the United States or ultimately across the world. So, so it goes without saying, right? Grower participation in these programs is required, whether they're tenant growers, whether they're operator owners, or whether they are managers who are prescribing what needs to actually happen on individual parcels and fields of land. I've talked about continuity, right? You got to stay with the program in order to accumulate those benefits. The study that Keiko co-authored did talk about how especially when it comes to cover cropping, how in year 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, the benefits really started to be noticeable. They started to hit the bank accounts, they started to hit the pocketbooks, they started to really add up. The benefits in year 1 were negligible. They were important, they were there, they were measurable, but from a science standpoint, from a financial analysis standpoint, they were minuscule. They might not have been worth the heartache and the headache, but they were worth it in the sense of they're leading to years 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 down the road of those benefits. The incentive piece here is the piece that is sorely lacking. Last year, I was here speaking and talking about carbon markets. I believe very strongly in carbon markets. I think that talk that I gave last year was 2 to 3 years premature. Carbon markets have not matured to the point yet where they are in and of themselves supplying enough of an incentive to have growers change their practices completely and say, I'm all in on that. It's too new. We don't yet know what's going on and how to consistently generate carbon credits as a commodity. I think we are 2 to 5 years from that. And what now is important is to start now, and you've heard this again from everybody's talking about the carbon, the promise of carbon farming. You start now, you get in so that those benefits accrue and they build up over the next 2, 5, 10, and 30 harvests into the future. So that's where we are at right now. So what is it going to take to get growers and to get managers and land investors and owners to say, yep, I'm gonna go start this now, but I need that starting, I need that to be de-risked. I need that to not break my bank. I need to not put my family in jeopardy, because the most important thing for farming is to farm, and it's to farm and supply the food systems that we all rely on. It's not to take that land out of production in order to go back to native habitat and native forest. We need the corn, we need the soy, we need the sugar beets, we need the cattle, we need the pigs, we need the peas and the wheat and the rice and all of the other things. And so when we look at the incentive programs that are out there, there are a couple good examples, primarily from the U.S. federal government. U.S. federal government has been, and Nrcs and EQIP programs, et cetera, they've been creating incentives that are good in terms of they have fairly decent payouts, but they have a huge struggle, a huge barrier to scaling. They are disconnected, they are highly distributed, and they are they're not necessarily consistent across all states, counties, regions, and across the country. So we've talked a little bit about cover crop adoption, right? Those cover crop costs can be expensive. Those public programs, right, like EQIP and programs from Nrcs are good, not designed to scale, and easy access to location-specific, retail or vendor-agnostic agronomic support is often missing, right? You can get the agronomic support is oftentimes very easy to get from a retailer who's going to agronomically advise you to, or your tenants and your the people who are operating the land that you manage, to use more of their product and or more of their equipment, right? So there's it's not disinterested. So when we talk about the low payments, the high cost, and the administrative burden, that ultimately creates a situation where farmers are like, yeah, it might be a good idea, but I'm not willing to risk it. I'm not willing to literally bet the farm that this is going to work, especially in year one. So there's a need for a better structured incentive program that gets us over the hump from where we are today to where you have robust, predictable carbon markets and the ability to supply that with farmed carbon or farmed carbon credits. So where does that leave us today? It means that investors and landowners and operators and even big organizations with ag in their supply chain, they're missing out on this opportunity because it's important to get started now in order to build up the carbon sequestration capacity and the expertise of how to farm carbon in your land or in this particular plot of land, which is going to vary a little bit from that different plot of land. So what then needs to happen? Well, there's a simple solution that is not simple to implement. It is simple, but it's not easy, right? Pay growers fairly, pay them fast and immediately, and provide free agronomic support. Farmers and growers will make the transition, and companies can achieve their ESG goals, these commitments that they're making from the boardroom around their climate and carbon pledges. They can start to meet those goals as farmers make that regenerative transition, and there is a net benefit then, obviously, to the land. That's the whole idea around regeneration and regenerative ag, is that you are creating more climate resilient land, produces better, healthier, more climate resilient crops and yields. So that brings us to, what about this idea of what we at Sibo have called a carbon bridge? And this is the idea, very simply, that says, hey, let's create a pay-for-practice program that is decoupled from verified carbon credits that come out of the other end. So let's create a pay-for-practice program that is designed to incentivize, create enough of an incentive today for growers to start the transition to regenerative farming, to create a net beneficial, financially viable solution for them that will either make them money or at the very least subsidize the cost of their transition to go from from conventional practices today to regenerative practices. And over time, as those practices start to yield carbon credits that are verified by the verification agencies and dot all the I's and check all the T's, then those carbon credits become something that the grower, the landowner, whoever's entitled to that commodity is able to participate in. They're able to buy and sell them on registries. They're able to give them or sell them to organizations to retire their ESG goals and their Scope 3 emissions reduction goals and meet their carbon and climate commitments. So remember those three findings from the how does conservation affect the farm's bottom line report that I talked about earlier, right? Those three was that no-till is profitable with higher net returns and lower per acre costs, that cover cropping is profitable, especially after year 3, with higher net returns and lower per acre costs, and that success happens when practices are adopted in a stepwise fashion. Well, a carbon bridge type program, a carbon bridge incentive type program, is designed to meet each of these 3 key aspects of a successful conservation farming program that will not break the bank for the grower and will produce higher net returns for that grower. The idea of that carbon bridge then is to de-risk the transition from conventional agriculture, conventional farming, to conservation and regenerative farming, while producing or laying the groundwork, literally, to produce carbon credits that are third-party, independently verified, the highest quality, most highly demand carbon credits, the ones that Delta Airlines is buying and Amazon is buying and Microsoft is buying and all of that. So when we start thinking about how that might work, now you can start to envision, I hope, this concept that an organization with deep pockets and wide reach that has made very public carbon and climate commitments can say, yes, we have ag in our supply chain, we believe in regenerative agriculture, and we know that the transition from conventional to regenerative practices is something that needs to happen in a stepwise fashion, and it is unreasonable for us to ask that farmers bear all of the risk and landowners bear all of the risk for taking on these steps in year 1. So then what might happen is an organization puts up an amount of money, let's call it $1 million, and says, hey, we will fund a transition program for so many acres that will pay the growers for verified practices. If they're doing the practices, we will pay them for it. Full stop. In year 1 and year 2 and year 3, regardless of what the output is. If there happens to be a verified carbon credit outcome, then in those years, the funding organization gets those carbon credits up to a certain amount of years, number of years to be determined. After that, any subsequently produced carbon credits go back to the grower or the landowner, whoever's entitled to that commodity legally, and they can sell them to the funding company, or they can sell them on the open registries, they can put them for sale, or they can put them in their own pocket and keep them as an investment asset, or offset their own carbon footprint if they so choose. So this idea is to say, let's create a bridge program that incentivizes growers for the practice of conversion and has an eye towards what the carbon output, the verified carbon credit output, will be at the end. Well, the way that this has happened and the way that this can happen is with scale and with the technology that Sibo Technologies has produced. So the big question is, well, would businesses actually do this? Is there anybody who's actually interested in making this happen? The answer is a resounding yes. And the answer is a resounding yes, because this is what we at Sibo Technologies are doing. And we are working with these large organizations, and they're saying, by God, you've hit it. We know we need third-party verified carbon credits, and we know that it's really hard for individual growers to get there today because it's risky. And we would be remiss if we didn't say it was risky, if we didn't admit that it was risky. So let's bridge that gap. Let's cross that chasm together by creating incentives that pay for practice and are designed to, at the end of that bridge, to have created an ecosystem where carbon is now a regular, predictable commodity that can be sold on registries as a very high-quality, verified commodity. Ultimately, that's what the carbon bridge concept is all about. Carbon bridges then become really turnkey ESG solutions for these large companies. They put in money, technology monitors, verifies, and reports on the program. Enrollment is quick and easy for the growers and the owners and the land managers. And through the tracking of this process, the land is regenerated, which has net beneficial results for the actual soils, but also on the outcome, we believe at Sibo Technologies that it does produce, and it will produce, we're betting that it will produce high quality, third-party registry verified carbon credits. And ultimately, those become the foundation for the new technology and the new carbon markets that are out there. That revenue going into the pockets of the grower and or the landowner, again, whoever is legally entitled to capture the benefit of that new carbon commodity. Additionally, as we start thinking about how the monitoring and the verification processes happen, because monitoring and verification requires the verification of sustainable and conservation and regenerative practices, now there's yet another benefit of being able to certify grain and yield from this field or that field as regeneratively grown. And we see an emerging demand on the consumer side of the market for regeneratively grown, regeneratively sourced consumer products. Pretty soon we're going to see, cornflakes with 25% regeneratively sourced corn. Or we're already seeing consumer foods like crackers from Post. I think Chris from Indigo was mentioning that as a great example today, a carbon negative cracker that you can eat with your cheese. We're seeing organizations that are, produce textiles, right? Your Patagonia, right? Uses regeneratively farmed cotton. And so the ability to certify where those grains are coming from, where those crops and those yields, how they are being produced, becomes a knock-on benefit for the grower, for the owner, for the land manager, being able to command a higher commodity price for certified regeneratively sourced yields. And that is a natural outcome of the verification and the quantification of this carbon bridge program. Because in order to pay a grower or a landowner for what they are doing, they have to be able to prove that they're doing it. And we have to be able to create an environment where they can prove that they're doing it in a way that does not burden them. That's where technology comes in. So, yes, you guessed it, Sibo is the first one to actually come out with a carbon bridge program like this. We have funded it ourselves, and like I said at the very beginning of this presentation, we are currently accepting enrollments or enrollment candidates until February for this calendar year. And the enrollment is free, there's no cost to the grower. There are strict qualifications, so not everybody will qualify. But if you or the people whose land you manage or who you invest in is here in Iowa, chances are really, really high that they will qualify at those highest levels if they are farming corn and soy. Right now we're limited to corn and soy across the U.S. And we have a cap. We do have a little bit of headroom still in our program for this calendar year, the 2022 growing season. And anybody who qualifies but misses that window will be automatically kind of at the front of the line for 2023 vintage. What ultimately this means is that, everybody out there says, hey, we're farmer first, we're farmer friendly, we're farmer focused. And most organizations believe that. It's sincere. Sibo is not in the business of selling additional products. We don't have inputs to sell. We don't have equipment to lease. We're not in the real estate business. We work with anybody. We are a technology company. We're a platform technology company that combines remote sensing from satellite data and deep modeling and ground truth data in a way that provides carbon bridge programs to growers and owners, and on the other side of the coin, provides MVR or monitoring, verification, and reporting technology for enterprises and organizations that want to look and manage, entire portfolios of land, providing land insights and carbon quantification, yield quantification, and practice history, all scaled, all in real time. This is not stuff that's under development. This is not stuff that might be coming soon. This is stuff that is out today and is available. And we want you all to be using it. So as a technology platform company, we are putting our money first where our mouth is with our Sibo carbon bridge. And that is the model or the template for the other large organizations that we are working with to put in vastly more funding into carbon programs and carbon bridge programs that will allow them to retire their ESG goals, allow them to achieve their carbon and climate commitments. And then what CIBO does is it will match growers and owners with available programs that they qualify for and allow them to enroll in those programs. And the cool thing is that these programs can stack. The stacked benefits, the co-benefits of stacking, whether it's federal, state programs, with a Sibo carbon bridge program, with another privately funded program run through Sibo, is absolutely beneficial to growers and owners. And it is 100% what we want every single grower to do. The only thing that can't be stacked is you can't double count carbon credits. Carbon credits come from the land. You cannot double count those. But if there is a pay for practice program, hey, will you pay me if I'm doing no-till on 100 acres? Yep. Can I also get, will you pay me if I'm doing cover cropping on that same 100 acres? Yep. Can I also get EQIP funding for that? Yep. If you jump through their hoops and you can meet their requirements, absolutely. They do not cancel each other out. If you have land that is generating a carbon credit that is being documented and sold on another carbon registry, that you can only have one carbon credit per year from any 1 acre. So you can't sell the same carbon credit on, through Sibo as you can through, say, Indigo or Nori or Bayer or, any of the other private programs that might be out there. That's the only thing that you can't stack, or that your growers cannot stack. And so there is a world of opportunity with this idea of a carbon bridge program that allows growers to actually start making money and realizing real ROI to make that transition to regenerative agriculture. And at the very beginning, I said our mission at Sibo is to scale regenerative agriculture. We believe that this is the best way to get growers to start in a stepwise manner, experimenting with and adopting at a conservative, but kind of still leaning into it pace of adopting regenerative agriculture and starting that process of carbon farming. The money is out there. We are proving that. It is currently available. These programs are live. I want you all to go up and sign up for this, or to tell your growers and your landowners to go sign up for this, because it is available now. As we start thinking about, hey, if you're here and you're representing one of these larger companies, hey, we've got some ESG goals. We might want to be part of this program. How would we get started actually sponsoring our own carbon bridge program? That is what our technology platform is literally designed to do. We are our own first customer. And so by setting up these carbon programs, we work with organizations to say, what are your specific ESG goals? What is your budget? Not to pay to Sibo, but to pay to the growers who are participating in your program. And then we will provide the monitoring, the verification, the quantification at scale of all of that work that is going on. We provide an automatic 10-year look-back history simply by defining a field. That's how good this technology is. It's truly, truly innovative. The pay for practice incentive gets people started. The carbon credit potential as a commodity product coming out of the land keeps people going. But we know that there is still this risk chasm that the bridge programs and this concept of a bridge program is designed to cross. In years 4, 5, and beyond, right? Remember I talked about with a bridge program, the initial sponsors they receive any carbon credits that come out of those practices in those early years. If the carbon credits that come out of those practices in the early years are zero, the sponsors get zero. Farmer still gets paid because it is a pay for practice program. Did the practice happen? Yep, here's money. If there's a carbon credit that came out of that, and we will be checking for that, then in those first early years, the program sponsors get those credits, and then in subsequent years, they get the right of first refusal to buy them from the farmer. And Sibo is also providing free to the farmer agronomic support for regenerative agriculture practices specifically tailored to the county, to the land that they are on. So ultimately, that's where we are at. So again, I've already said this enough. I want you to see this in action. We've got this up at our booth, or we'd be happy to schedule something with you, at a time that's convenient for you and for your teams. So ultimately, we are continuing to partner with growers. We're continuing to partner with land managers. We are continuing to partner with land investors who want to use the insights from our platforms to actually help drive investment theses and investment prospectus, and to be able to actually find and locate land in which to invest that are part of regenerative programs like this. This is the sort of information and data that Sibo has built into our platform and that we take very seriously in terms of protection, and we want to make sure that we can pay back to the growers the costs, both in heartache and headache and in the pocketbook, that it takes to actually convert over to regenerative farming. So with that, I would be happy to open it up for any sort of questions. That's the end of the presentation. I'm sure Tammy would have done a whole lot better, but thank you for your patience with me. I'm not nearly as good looking. Yeah, thank you. Maybe we can have her do that as well. All right, so for some questions, please speak loudly, and then I will repeat it so that people watching the live stream can hear it as well. So I saw your hand first.
You said you don't cover corn and beans. That's the only two crops that you work with.
Today, yes, just corn and beans. So the question for those of you watching the live stream is, I heard you only say it covers corn and beans, and yes, that is correct. Right now, the Sibo platform is limited to corn and beans for the bridge program. We do also have data and the ability to track carbon footprint and yield predictions and practice history for things like cotton, and we're working on some other crops, wheat, yellow peas, and some others. But it is just corn and beans right now, correct?
So if that's two crops and you have a 3-year rotation, you only plant corn every 3 years, but you still plant a cover crop every fall, how does that, we know till, but how does that figure in?
So if you've got, are you harvesting that cover for cash? No. Okay. So is it, are you leaving it fallow, or is it just in between from fall to spring? Fall to spring. Okay. Sure. So that sounds to me, standing up here, just having this short conversation, the question, sorry, for those of you watching live stream is, what if it's a 3-year rotation with corn and beans and cover crop? Is that?
Yeah, I don't plant beans.
Correct.
Oh,
okay. So I would say, let's look at that. That is something for our program managers to go figure out. I don't know the answer to your question, if how that maps out to be. So I don't know if there's a specific requirement around it has to be corn, beans, corn, beans, corn, beans, or if it's corn, cover, barley, corn, whatever. So yeah, good question though. I saw one here.
Yes, the number of years you sign up, and do you sign up for 1 year, or do you sign up for 10 years or 5 years?
Yeah, great question.
How about the rate? Some of these programs pay a whole bunch in the beginning.
Right.
Year number 1, and then it drops to the floor with some little deal.
Right. So the question for those of you watching on live stream are, how many years do you sign up for, and what is the rate from year 1, year 2, year 3? Is there a sliding scale of some sort? So what you sign up for is there is a contract, and I'm kind of looking at my partner in the back there. I think it is a 10-year contract with an opt-out, no fault opt-out at 4 years. She's holding up 4 fingers for me. So what that means is you're committing to a 4-year practice at least, and the ability to opt out in year 5. Does that answer the first part of your question?
What's the rate per year?
And then what's the rate per year? The rate per year is going to depend on the practices that you do. You don't have to do all of the practices, but it's up to $35 an acre, depending on what practices you do.
Is there a limit to the number of acres?
There is not a limit to the number of acres. We at Sibo have capped our enrollment at a number of thousands of acres. And we still have some room. We're still looking to fill that up. But once we cap that, once we hit that cap, that program, that specific program will close, and we'll start up another program for another year. Does that make sense? So in terms of the rate, it's up to $35 per acre in year 1. In year 2, that rate goes down to $25 an acre. Again, depending on the practices, and if you do all the practices, it's more. If you do one of the practices, it's less. And then in year 3, it gets less. And we actually have this listed, the dollar amounts up at our booth. There's a brochure and a big placard up there that actually has this all written out. And the idea is that the payments in each year are designed to cover the cost, or at least subsidize the transition. And as you're doing that in year 3, in year 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, now carbon credits should, that's the knock on wood piece, should be being generated and able to be a sold commodity. So the payments are not for carbon credits, it's just for being part of the program. It's just for doing the practice. In the event that carbon credits are generated in years 1 through 3, those accrue to Sibo. In years 4 and beyond, those accrue to the grower. And they can sell them on a registry, they can hold them, they can sell them back to Sibo if Sibo wants to buy them. That's how that comes. So the idea is that we will pay for practice regardless of the carbon credit outcome. And we hope and we expect that there will be a carbon credit outcome, but we'll take on the risk of doing that transition.
What happens
Yep.
at the end of 10 years?
At the end of 10 years, it is time for another contract talk. Do you want to do that? Do your tenants want to do that? Is that something that is interesting to you? So, and that's if you stay with the program for all 10 years. If you don't opt out in year 4, or in year 5, or any subsequent year to that.
Pay back if you opt out?
You do not. The payments are yours for the practices observed in that year. There is no clawback. And that's really important, right? Because a farmer can't say, hey, I'm going to do this practice and I've got to put this money in a CD or in a savings account and hope that nothing happens in 10 years. That doesn't make sense. That's not really a bridge program then. We want to make sure that we are doing what we can and that we are enabling a technology process for organizations to fund the transition, not to create some kind of goofy savings plan that somebody hopes works out in 10 years.
One other question.
Yeah.
Does that disqualify you from the other programs that we're now using through the Nrcs?
Great question. And the question for those of you online, does participation in a Sibo carbon bridge program disqualify you from NRCS or some other program? To our knowledge, no, it does not disqualify you. We do believe that you can stack these programs on top of each other and gain all of the benefits that are coming from all of them. There may be exceptions to that, right? Because a lot of these programs, we don't know everything there is to know about all the different programs. When it comes to equipment and NRCS, the pay-for-practice programs are stackable. We do know that. To the best of our knowledge, we do know that. What you cannot stack are sales of carbon credits. Carbon credits are not stackable. So if you're producing a carbon credit through a Sibo program, if we're verifying that is a Sibo carbon, that is a carbon credit as verified through Verra, one of the big 3 carbon registries, then you cannot then go to another company like an Indigo or a Nori or a Bayer program and get a carbon credit for that same land in that same year, right? Carbon credits are not, you can't double dip on those carbon credits. It'd be like trying to sell the same bushel of corn twice. It's one thing per year. Yeah, question here. Great question. For those of you online, the question was, I've been no-tilling for 20 years, can I qualify? So the question is possibly. If you have been, these programs are designed to get people to convert from conventional to regenerative. So if you've been no-tilling on 100% of your acres for 20 years, and you've been cover cropping on 100% of your acres for 20 years, and if you've been doing all of the other things, then no, there is no net additionality. You may have heard if you were in Chris's talk this morning, no additionality to that land. So you would not qualify for the Sibo carbon bridge program. There are other programs that you would qualify for. One of the things that Sibo believes, and I said this in this room last year at this time as well, is that farmers and growers who are doing regenerative agriculture and have been doing it for years and decades and generations ought not be penalized for making those good choices. There ought to be something that they can participate in as well that rewards them for doing what is beneficial to all of us when it comes to climate change and carbon sequestration and regenerating the land, creating climate resilient crops and healthy food systems. And so for that, remember, one of the things I had talked about in the presentation was one of the knock-on benefits of a carbon bridge type program is that you get the verification and the certification of the crops as regeneratively farmed. And Sibo issues a certification that for this year, the yield from this land is certified sustainable, certified regenerative. Does that have a value out in the marketplace? That is one of the things that I and my team are working very hard to go do so that now you can say, look, I'm selling this at the regenerative elevator and I get a nickel more a bushel. There is something there. And we have some programs in the works. They are not out yet. I said I wouldn't do this. The technology is out. The technology works. Our programs are coming out to create what we're calling a Sibo certified the Sibo certified program. And it's exactly for the situation that you're describing. Yeah, over here.
What is do you have a model of you said you max out $35 per acre the first year, 25 second year, what does that model look like?
So the question for those of you online is, what does the payment, the per year payment sliding scale model actually look like, and how does it max out? It maxes out at year 10. And again, we've got the details of the actual payments, $35 up to, that's an important caveat, right? Up to $35 per acre in year 1, up to $25 per acre in year 2, up to, I think is it 15 and in year 3, and it goes down. The idea is that the payments start larger in year 1 to help with the transition to a regenerative carbon farming stance. And as they decrease, the expectation is that the carbon markets and the carbon production from that land, the carbon credit production from that land, increases. And so it should be a decrescendo for you musicians in the audience, a decrescendo of pay for practice payments and a crescendo of carbon credit payments. And they should cross ideally at about year 3. And that's kind of the bet, that's the hypothesis that Sibo is making with this carbon bridge program, with our carbon bridge program. So does that answer the? Okay. Yeah, we do. We've got the contracts and we've got the details and the payment schedules put out there, right? And there's, it's up to $35 a year, $35 per acre in year 1. If you're doing both cover cropping and no-till, it's, I think, $14 if you're only doing no-till and you're not doing cover cropping, right? So there's some different ways that this works out based on what you are doing. We are not prescribing what the grower should do because nobody knows the land better than the grower. We don't know the land better than what the grower knows. And like that CAECO study described, that stepwise approach is one of the critical ingredients to success. And so we want to foster and facilitate that.
And did you say, or she might have said that you can get out within a certain amount of years?
Yes, yeah. So we put a 10-year contract out in front of you. There is an opt-out clause after year 4. So in year 5, you can opt out. And there's no clawbacks for that. Here and then back there. Great question. For those of you online, the question was, who owns the data? So that is, the data is stored and is protected inside of the Sibo platform. The organization, the farmer continues to own his or her data. The data is used in the Sibo platform for the purposes of, and this is all spelled out contractually as well in terms of what the data protection mechanisms and acceptable uses are. The data is used for monitoring, for verification, and for quantification of the practices that will lead to payments for those practices. We are not using that for marketing purposes or for things like that. Yeah, go ahead.
I walk away on year 4. Do I get to take it with me? You're going to hand me the numbers that I can go to Indigo or
Uh-huh.
here's what I did do. Here's what was predicted to be generated and verified. I'm going to start on the run.
Yes. So, we're not going to mail you a jump drive. That information is available to you. So the question was, hey, after 4 years, I'm going to walk with the Sibo program. Can I take my data and go to Indigo or go to somebody else and say, here's what I've done and here's the proof. So the answer to that is yes, you have access to your data. It's not going to be purged from our system. It won't be used to pay you anymore, but you continue to have access for as long as you choose to access your data in your system. It is also allowed to be used by the organizations who are funding that particular carbon bridge program. Remember, this idea of a carbon bridge program is, Amazon.com might have one. Pillsbury might have one. I'm making these names up. These are not actual customers or clients, and I wouldn't be at liberty to discuss who they were anyway. But just for giggles, if they were supplying the funds for a carbon bridge program that they wanted to incentivize people growers in their network to do these practices, they would have access to that data. Right? And that's for the purposes of facilitating payments and monitoring and verifying so that they can go back to their science-based targets, to their carbon disclosure project requirements, to their boards of directors who have said, what are our climate results? And they can say, hey, here's what we did. It was, Farmer Jane and Farmer Bob, they did these things, and we can prove that they did it over, 200,000 acres, because they're really rich farmers that have lots of acres. Does that kind of answer that question?
What do you do with the scope 3 emissions, products you buy? Are you going to tell us what those scope 3 are? So I can make a scope 3 product decision.
That's a fantastic question. So the question was, what are you doing on the scope 3 products that you buy, so that I can make a scope 3 decision? This whole sort of a program where we're using regenerative agriculture in order to achieve carbon and climate goals typically falls under scope 3 emissions reductions or scope 3 emissions controls. So from that standpoint, these are, they're part and parcel of the same thing. And I think we should probably have a deeper discussion if you're asking about what does Sibo technologies use in terms of like compute infrastructure for our scope 3, and that all of that stuff is available for disclosure and for discussion, but probably not right here in the rest of this session.
To his question, if he was to walk in year 4 to go to Indigo, shouldn't it be disclosed that because of the rules of additionality that he would not, more than likely not qualify at Indigo if he's been no-tilling and cover cropping? So in essence, if you start with Sibo, you're at Sibo, right? I mean, in all fairness.
Absolutely. The rules of additionality when it comes to carbon credits still apply. And it doesn't matter if you're with Sibo or with Indigo. If you're with Indigo and you come to Sibo, if you've been with Indigo and you've already been doing this and you come to us, we're going to ask you the same questions when it comes to carbon credit generation. If you have been doing this for more than, I think it's 3 years, two or 3 years, you do not qualify for carbon credit consideration for that particular piece of land.
Assuming that the market forces don't change.
Correct. Which is why we're still at this early stage, which is why we think that this idea of a carbon bridge program that is a pay-for-practice program rather than pegged only to a carbon credit output is really important. So the idea of a carbon bridge program is growers get paid for doing the practice regardless of the carbon credit outcome. Yeah, here.
Just to bring this to understand, like on a typical, let's say, Corn Belt farm, 200 bushel corn, 50 bushel soybean, an acre, how much is it going to take to earn a carbon credit, and then any idea what that potential value of that credit might be here in a few years?
Yeah, those are great questions. For those of you online, let's just talk through the question was, let's talk through an example, right? You've got a 200 bushel per acre corn, 50 bushel per acre soy field. What does it take to actually produce a carbon credit on that field? For the sake of argument, let's say it's 1 acre, okay? On average, and this is going to vary by geography, but in Iowa, you get between 3/4 of a carbon credit to 1.5 carbon credits per acre. And a carbon credit is roughly approximate to 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide abated or stored in the soil. Okay? So a carbon credit is 1 ton, and a carbon credit generally equals 1 ton of CO2 or CO2 equivalent abated or sequestered in the soil. And in Iowa, you get, generally speaking, between 3/4 of a credit to 1.5 credits per acre when you do all of the regenerative practices. So when you do cover cropping and no-till and have a corn bean rotation, generally speaking, you get about 3/4 to 1.5 credits per acre, carbon credits per acre. Now, what is the current market value of a carbon credit? If it is a high-quality carbon credit, meaning it's a third-party registry verified carbon credit, not something that you're getting from a tree farmer in Borneo, certified by, my little sister in her high school project. Those are currently running anywhere from, from $38 to $45 to $50 per carbon credit. They are a commodity, and they fluctuate every day. A lot of that is because it's new. We've seen reports at Sibo that say, organizations are willing to pay as much as $150 per carbon credit. Those seem extreme to us today. Maybe in a couple of years they won't be. We know that any industry, any individual for that matter, can buy a carbon credit to offset their carbon footprint. To that extent, the large carbon producing enterprises, think big energy, big oil, are being compelled through regulations and through penalties instituted by global governance bodies to offset their carbon footprint, and typically they are doing that by purchasing carbon credits. And because they have a lot of visibility on their ESG and on their carbon footprint and their retirement activities, the carbon credits that they buy have to be above reproach, meaning that high quality carbon credits, like those that we're talking about here at Sibo, like those that our competitors talk about as well, the third-party verified carbon credits, and third-party verified, I mean verified, CAR and the gold standard. Those are kind of the big three registration verification bodies here in the United States. Those high-quality carbon credits are the ones that are commanding the highest prices. You and I could go on to a website and buy a carbon credit, probably from somewhere in China for $5. We can buy low-quality carbon credits. They're all over the place. But if we are an organization trying to retire a regulatorily imposed penalty or trying to publicly disclose our ESG goals, that's where we have to be above reproach, which is what is commanding the high prices and high value on these carbon credits. And that's what Sibo is going after. And to be completely fair, that's what Indigo and that's what Nori and that's what Bayer are going after as well. We all agree that high quality carbon credits are absolutely imperative if we're going to actually create a viable market for these. Yep.
During the 10-year contract, if you change ownership of the land, like obviously give it to the next generation or sell it or whatever to my kids or whatnot, can that contract be reauthorized or something? Because I'm breaking the contract by selling the land to the kids or whatnot, and then does the information in your
Yeah, so the question, and this will be the last one because doors are open here, and I'd be happy to have continue the conversation up at the booth as well. Question for those of you online, if you're still watching, what happens if I sell my land, during the duration of that 10-year contract? The short, cute answer is that's a question for torts. The longer answer is there are conditions in the contract that make it transferable. It still has to be agreed to or re-agreed to by whoever the receiving party is. And then there's data considerations and things like that. And that's going to be dealt with, at least at this early stage, on a case-by-case basis. Yep. Thank you all so much for sticking around.